The city never truly slept. Even at 3:17 a.m., when most windows were dark and the traffic had thinned to the occasional taxi slicing through red lights, the city breathed, slow, metallic, and patient. Elias knew this because he drove through it every night. His job was simple: night courier. Envelopes, small boxes, things that needed to move quietly across the city while everyone else dreamed. He liked the silence. He liked the empty avenues where the skyscrapers looked less like offices and more like enormous black cliffs. But there was one part of the city he never liked driving through: District 12. No one ever explained why. Dispatch simply marked the deliveries and expected them done. At first, Elias assumed it was just the usual rumors people spread about old neighborhoods. Every big city had them. Stories about abandoned subway tunnels, derelict hospitals, buildings where the lights sometimes turned on by themselves. Still, District 12 had a different feeling. It began gradually. The streetlights became farther apart, the buildings older, taller too, but not modern tall. Older stone towers and concrete blocks from decades ago, their windows stacked like endless rows of watching eyes. That night, his GPS guided him straight into the heart of it. Package drop, 1107 Halberg Tower, the screen read. Elias frowned. Halberg Tower was one of those massive buildings that had been half empty since the financial crash years ago. 28 floors, most abandoned, some rented cheaply to people who didn't ask questions. Rain began to fall as he turned the corner. The building rose ahead of him, its facade wet and dark, the top lost in low clouds. Only a few windows glowed faintly. Elias parked by the curb. The street was empty. No pedestrians. No other cars. Just the low hum of electricity in the wires overhead and the whisper of rain sliding along the pavement. He grabbed the package from the passenger seat. It was strange. Long and narrow, wrapped in dull brown paper with no return address. He had delivered thousands of packages, but this one felt heavier than it should have been. Not physically heavy. Something else, like holding an object that had been somewhere cold for a very long time. The lobby door opened with a reluctant metallic groan when he pushed it. Inside, the air smelled like dust and wet concrete. The lobby lights flickered, as if unsure whether they wanted to remain on. The place looked deserted. The front desk was empty. Old mailboxes lined one wall, many hanging open like crooked teeth. At the far end stood the elevator. Its doors were closed, but the floor indicator above it was moving slowly downward. 18, 17, 16. Elias waited. The building creaked around him. Old pipes clanged somewhere deep in the walls. The elevator indicator kept ascending until it reached the lobby. The doors slid open with a tired hiss. No one was inside. Good, Elias muttered. He stepped in and pressed the button for floor 11. The door shut. The elevator began rising. 2, 3, 4. Then it stopped. The light flickered. Elias looked at the panel. The elevator had stopped at floor 6, but he hadn't pressed 6. The doors opened halfway, then fully. The hallway outside was dark. Not dim, dark. The overhead lights were off, leaving only a thin gray glow from distant windows. Elias leaned slightly forward, peering out. No movement, no sound. The hallway stretched far in both directions, lined with identical apartment doors. For a moment, he thought he saw something move at the far end, but when he blinked, it was gone. "Hello?" he called out. His voice echoed down the corridor and returned thinner. No response. After a few seconds, the elevator doors closed again. The car continued upward. 7, 8, 9. Elias exhaled slowly. Old building, he told himself. Faulty system. But when the elevator reached the 11th floor and the doors opened again, he froze. The hallway looked exactly the same as the one on the 6th floor. Same long corridor. Same darkness. Same rows of doors disappearing into shadow. Even the faint gray light from distant windows looked identical. Elias stepped out. His shoes echoed softly on the tile floor. The door numbers began at 1101. The delivery address was 1107. He walked slowly past 1103, 1105. Then he stopped. Apartment 1107's door was slightly open, just an inch. The gap was black, no light inside. He knocked gently. The door creaked wider. The apartment beyond was empty. Completely empty. No furniture, no sound. Just bare concrete walls and a single window showing the rainy city far below. "Hello?" Elias said again. Nothing. He looked down at the package. Maybe the instructions meant leave it inside. He stepped across the threshold and placed it on the floor. The moment the package touched the ground, he heard something behind him. Footsteps. Slow, soft, approaching from the hallway. Elias turned. The hallway was empty, but the footsteps continued. Tap, tap, tap. They sounded as if someone were walking toward the apartment, yet there was no one there. The sound reached the doorway and stopped. Elias felt the hair rise on the back of his neck. "Okay," he whispered, backing away. Delivery done. He stepped out of the apartment and pulled the door shut. The hallway was silent again. He walked quickly toward the elevator. When he pressed the call button, nothing happened. He pressed it again. Still nothing. The elevator indicator above the door was blank. The entire panel had gone dark. Elias frowned and checked his phone. No signal. The hallway lights flickered once, then again. Somewhere down the corridor, a door creaked open. Elias looked toward the sound. One of the apartment doors had slowly swung outward. Beyond it was darkness. Then another door opened farther down. Then another. One by one, doors began to creak open along the hallway, all of them revealing black interiors. Elias stepped backward until his shoulders touched the elevator doors. "Hello," he called again, louder this time. The hallway answered with silence. Then he heard breathing, not his own, something else, faint, wet, coming from inside the open apartments. Elias pressed the elevator button repeatedly. Nothing. The breathing grew louder. Several apartments now had shapes in the darkness. Not clear shapes, just deeper shadows moving inside the black rooms. One of them stepped into the hallway. At first, Elias thought it was just a person standing in the dark. But then the hallway lights flickered again, and he saw that the thing's limbs were too long. Its arms hung nearly to the floor, its head tilted sideways as if its neck had too many joints. Another shape emerged from a different doorway. Then another. They didn't rush him. They just stood there in the corridor, watching. Elias finally did the only thing his instincts allowed. He ran. He sprinted down the hallway away from the elevator, past rows of doors and shadows that seemed to stretch toward him as he passed. The corridor didn't end. It kept going and going. The apartment numbers climbed higher. 1115, 1121, 1134. That didn't make sense. Floor 11 shouldn't have that many units. The lights above him flickered violently as he ran. Behind him, the footsteps multiplied. Dozens now. Long limbs slapping softly against tile. Elias reached a stairwell door and shoved it open. He burst into the stairwell and slammed the door behind him. The echo of pursuit stopped instantly. The stairwell was silent. He leaned against the wall, breathing hard. "Just get out," he whispered. "Just go down." He started descending the stairs 2 at a time. Floor 10, floor 9, floor 8. But something was wrong. The building felt deeper, the air colder. When he reached the door for the lobby level, the sign beside it didn't say lobby. It said floor 0. Elias hesitated. Halberg Tower never had a floor 0. Slowly he pushed the door open. The corridor beyond looked older than the rest of the building. The walls were bare concrete, the ceiling low. Dim yellow bulbs hung on wires every few meters. And along both sides of the corridor were doors. Hundreds of them, each one identical, each one slightly open. From inside the rooms came that same wet breathing sound. Elias stepped back toward the stairwell, but the door behind him had disappeared. In its place was another identical hallway, stretching into darkness. The lights flickered again. The breathing grew louder. And somewhere deep in the endless corridors of the city beneath the city, something began to walk toward him. Slowly, patiently, as if it had been waiting a very long time for someone to finally deliver the package. Elias stood frozen in the corridor of floor 0, staring at the endless rows of doors. The yellow bulbs above him buzzed faintly, each one swinging slightly as if the building itself were breathing. The breathing from inside the rooms grew louder, not synchronized, not human. Hundreds of different rhythms, wet and heavy, filling the air like the lungs of something enormous hidden behind the walls. He forced himself to move, slowly at first, then faster. The corridor stretched endlessly ahead, doors lining both sides like cells in some underground hive. Some doors were open wider than others. Inside them he saw almost nothing, just black rooms that seemed deeper than they should be. But occasionally something moved inside, a shape shifting in the dark, an arm sliding along the floor, a head turning slowly toward the doorway. Elias kept walking. The sound of his footsteps echoed strangely, not just ahead and behind him, but beneath him too, as if there were hollow spaces below the concrete. Then he heard another sound, footsteps that were not his own, far away at first, then slowly getting closer. Something was walking in the corridor behind him. He turned. The hallway stretched into dim yellow distance. At first he saw nothing. Then a shape moved under one of the lights. It stepped forward slowly. Its body was thin and long, its joints bending in wrong directions. Its skin looked pale gray in the sickly light. Its head hung forward slightly, like it wasn't used to standing upright. But its eyes were open, too open, wide black circles reflecting the bulbs above. Elias backed away. The thing did not run. It just kept walking toward him. Another shape appeared farther down the corridor behind it. Then another. The doors along the walls began opening wider, hinges groaning softly. Hands, long pale hands, slid around the door frames. Elias turned and ran again. The corridor twisted left after a few 100 meters, then right. Then it split into 3 identical hallways. He chose one randomly and sprinted down it. The breathing sounds grew louder the farther he went. The doors here were open wider, some completely open. He passed one room where something sat on the floor facing the wall, rocking slowly back and forth. Another where dozens of long arms crawled across the ceiling, like pale spiders. Elias didn't stop running. Eventually, the hallway opened into a massive underground chamber. Elias skidded to a halt. The room was enormous, like an abandoned subway station, but wrong. The ceiling was lost in darkness far above. Thick concrete pillars rose like tree trunks throughout the space, and everywhere across the floor were doors, thousands of them, standing upright in rows, not attached to walls, just doors, each one leading into darkness. Elias stepped forward cautiously. The floor was covered in thin dust, but he could see footprints everywhere, not human footprints, long, narrow ones, dragging marks. Something had been moving through here constantly. Then he saw something else. In the center of the chamber stood a single object under a bright white light. The package, the one he had delivered to apartment 1107. It now sat on a metal pedestal in the middle of the room. Elias frowned. "That's impossible," he whispered. He had left it upstairs. Slowly he approached the pedestal. The breathing sounds from the doors around the chamber grew quieter, as if the things inside were waiting, watching. The package looked exactly the same. Brown paper, long, narrow, no address now, just blank wrapping. Elias hesitated, but something pulled at his curiosity. He reached out and touched the paper. It was warm. Slowly he tore the wrapping open. Inside was a small black box, about the size of a book. It had no seams, no lid, just a smooth surface that seemed to absorb the light. The moment Elias lifted it from the pedestal, every door in the chamber slammed shut. The sound echoed like thunder through the underground space. Then the breathing stopped, completely. Silence filled the chamber. Elias felt the box vibrate slightly in his hands. Then he heard whispering, not from the room, from inside the box. Hundreds of voices murmuring in languages he didn't recognize. The whispers grew louder. The surface of the box began to crack slowly, thin glowing lines spreading across it like fractures in glass. Elias dropped it. The box hit the floor. The cracks burst open. Darkness poured out. Not shadow, something thicker, like black smoke made of liquid night. It spread across the floor rapidly, flowing between the rows of doors. From behind those doors came sudden pounding, violent, desperate. The doors shook as if the things behind them were trying to escape. One door burst open. A long, pale creature crawled out onto the floor. But the black darkness reached it first. The moment it touched the creature, the thing collapsed into dust. More doors burst open. Dozens of the creatures spilled out, their limbs bending wildly as they tried to run. But the darkness spread faster. Wherever it flowed, the creatures disintegrated instantly. Elias backed away in horror. The chamber filled with screams, high, distorted sounds that barely resembled voices. Within seconds, the black darkness had swallowed half the room. Then it stopped, completely still. The whispers faded. Silence returned. Elias looked around. The creatures were gone. Only gray dust covered the floor where they had been. In the center of the chamber, the cracked box lay motionless. Then something moved inside the darkness, pooling around it. A shape began to rise, slow, massive. Elias felt the ground tremble slightly as the thing stood. It was tall, far taller than any human. Its body formed from the same black substance that had poured from the box, shifting constantly like living smoke. Two glowing white shapes appeared where its eyes should be. They turned slowly toward Elias. The thing spoke. Its voice was not loud, but it echoed through the entire chamber. Delivery received. Elias couldn't move. His legs felt locked. The creature took one slow step toward him. The floor cracked beneath its weight. "Courier," the voice continued, "you have opened the gate." The darkness around the chamber began flowing outward toward the corridors, toward the stairwell, toward the city above. Elias suddenly understood something terrible. The things behind the doors hadn't been the worst part of this place. They had been prisoners. The box had been their lock, and he had just opened it. The creature took another step closer. The glowing white eyes brightened. "The city above," it said softly, "is very large. Far above them, beyond the layers of concrete and forgotten corridors, the lights of the sleeping city continued to glow. Cars moved through quiet streets. People slept in tall buildings. None of them knew that something ancient had just been delivered beneath their feet." The creature leaned closer to Elias. Its voice lowered to a whisper. "And we are very hungry." Elias stumbled backward as the towering figure of living darkness leaned closer. The glowing white eyes hovered in the shifting mass like two cold stars. The chamber trembled with each of its slow movements. The black substance that formed its body flowed outward across the concrete floor like a spreading tide. The rows of standing doors began to rot where the darkness touched them. Wood warped, metal hinges dissolved. Everything it touched seemed to decay instantly. Elias turned and ran. He sprinted across the chamber, weaving between the endless rows of doors. Behind him, the creature did not rush. It simply walked forward, but with every step the darkness spread farther, devouring the floor and pillars and anything left of the strange underground prison. Elias spotted a corridor at the far end of the chamber and dashed toward it. The passage was narrow and low, with cracked concrete walls and flickering bulbs strung along exposed wires. He ran through it without slowing. His lungs burned. His mind raced. He had to reach the stairwell. He had to get back to the street. But the corridor twisted again and again, branching into other tunnels. Some of them sloped upward. Others descended deeper underground. The city beneath the city stretched like a labyrinth. Elias chose the tunnels that climbed upward, taking stairs two at a time whenever he found them. The deeper he went into the maze, the more signs appeared that this place had once been something else. Old subway platforms buried behind brick walls, rusted maintenance tunnels, storage rooms filled with broken equipment. It was as if generations of construction had simply built over the forgotten layers of the city instead of removing them. And somewhere below it all, something ancient had been waiting. As Elias ran, the lights in the tunnels began to go out behind him one by one. Darkness rolled through the corridors like a slow wave. Sometimes he heard the creature's voice echo faintly through the concrete. "The city is open." Sometimes he heard other sounds, cracking stone, metal bending, something vast forcing its way through spaces not meant to hold it. Elias finally reached a heavy metal door marked emergency exit. He shoved it open and burst into another stairwell. This one looked newer, cleaner, painted walls, real fluorescent lights. He nearly collapsed with relief. He climbed the stairs as fast as he could. Floor 2, floor 3, floor 4. The building above must have been connected to Halberg Tower somehow through the underground structures. Elias didn't care. He just needed to reach the surface. When he pushed through the door at the top of the stairwell, cold night air hit his face. He stepped out into an alley. Rain was still falling. The city stretched around him, alive with distant lights and the hum of traffic. For a moment, Elias simply stood there, breathing. He had made it out. Cars passed at the end of the street. A neon sign flickered above a late-night diner. Somewhere a siren wailed far away. Everything looked normal. Too normal. Then the ground beneath his feet trembled slightly. Elias turned back toward the alley entrance. At first, nothing seemed different. Then a thin stream of black liquid seeped out from under the door he had just come through. It slid across the wet pavement like oil. More of it followed. The metal door began to bulge outward slowly, as if something massive were pressing against it from the other side. Elias backed away. The door exploded off its hinges. Darkness poured out into the alley. It spread across the walls, climbing upward like a living shadow. The towering figure emerged from the broken doorway, unfolding itself to its full height beneath the rain-soaked sky. The glowing white eyes turned toward the street. Cars drove past the end of the alley, their drivers unaware of the thing now standing less than 50 meters away. The creature looked up at the towering buildings around it. Thousands of windows filled the skyline. Behind those windows were people sleeping, watching television, working late shifts, living their ordinary lives. The creature spoke again. Its voice seemed to vibrate through the entire block. A city of millions. Elias ran toward the street, shouting desperately, "Hey, hey, run, get out of here." A taxi slowed near the corner, the driver staring at him in confusion. Then the darkness spilled out of the alley and onto the road. The streetlights flickered and died instantly. The taxi driver's headlights illuminated the creature fully for the first time. The driver's face twisted in terror. He slammed the accelerator and sped away, tires screeching. But the darkness had already begun spreading down the street. It moved along the pavement, crawling up buildings, sliding through sewer grates, pouring into subway entrances. Within seconds, the entire block lost power. Windows went dark. People began shouting from inside apartments as their lights died. Elias looked up. The black tide was climbing the skyscrapers now, flowing up their sides like ink across glass. And from deep within it, shapes were forming. The creatures that had once been trapped behind the doors were returning, but they were different now. Larger, faster, freed. One dropped from the side of a building onto the street below, landing with a wet crack of bending limbs. It turned its head slowly toward Elias. Its wide black eyes reflected the faint city glow. Then it began running toward him. Elias ran again, through intersections, across empty streets, past closed shops and dark apartment towers. Behind him the city was changing. Block by block the lights vanished as the darkness spread outward from District 12. Sirens began to rise everywhere now. Police cars raced down avenues. Helicopters circled overhead. But none of them understood what they were facing. Elias finally reached a crowded night bus stop, where a handful of tired commuters waited under a shelter. They stared at him as he ran toward them, soaked with rain and panic. "You have to leave," he shouted. "All of you, now." One of them started to laugh nervously. "Buddy, you okay?" Then the power across the entire avenue went out. The streetlights died. The traffic signals went dark. The commuters turned slowly toward the skyline. A massive wall of moving darkness was rising above the buildings several blocks away, and within it, Countless white eyes were beginning to open. Elias whispered to himself, his voice shaking. I delivered it. The ground trembled again as something enormous moved within the spreading shadow. In the distance, the creature's voice echoed once more across the city. The night belongs to us now. And the millions of people living in the city were just beginning to realize that something had come up from beneath their streets. Something that had been waiting longer than the city itself. Something that would not stop spreading until every light in the skyline had gone out.